soundstripe.
My van is a VW, it is a Volkswagen 2003 T4. So my budget for this project was roughly 1,000. I was willing to stretch that up to 1,200 depending. The way a van works is you have the exterior obviously, which is metal. When you step inside an empty van that has no framework in it, nothing like that, it's obviously metal on the inside as well. So that tends to be very hollow. It's very sort of sound transfer, it happens very easily. You get a lot of vibrations as well when you're driving that sort of come up and vibrate in the metal. So overall it's not a great space to be in. It's not good for sound. It's very echoey, very sort of bassy and just not nice, very metallic as well. It's just not a great sound. However, what it does mean is that you have the capability to create something called a second skin. The way sound works is it travels as vibrations through kinetic energy in the air. So in order to prevent that transfer of noise, we need to interrupt that vibration somehow. So the way that decoupling works is if you imagine you have an exterior wall, so in a van that's obviously going to be the metal framework of the van, and an interior wall that are detached, so you've got a nice little air pocket between them. So the way that you're going to sort of attach those two is through battens. So in the diagram you'll see they're kind of intermittently sort of put in there. So the main thing that you don't want is to have complete transfer. So you don't want batten here to touch batten there and to all be connected so that the sound has super easy pathways to go through. You want to make it as hard as you can for that vibration to travel. And what adding mass does is it helps with sound absorption. So obviously we're trying to prevent these sound waves from traveling between exterior and interior. We've already talked about the interruption, but the other way to stop that is by absorption. So you've got your two walls, you've got your interior, your exterior, and you've got these studs between. The next thing you're going to do is add mass in between. They tend to have high humidity, and so condensation is a real issue. And they build custom MDF that is moisture resistant. So Matchboard obviously make customized MDF. MDF is a great material to use for soundproofing. Matchboard specifically has a really high density, and it also has an STC rating of 8. If you don't know what STC means, it's the sound transmission class. It's a very common way of sort of rating a material's ability to stop airborne sound, commonly used in the US. In order to create my decoupled walls, my stud walls, whatever you want to call them, in my van, I'm very lucky. T4s have a metal framework which kind of is concave, you'll see in the clips. So I only had to add a couple of battens in to be able to fix the MDF up against. The MDF is 6mm thick, so it bends nice and easily, so you can get it sort of in against the curvature of the van. The key part of this stage and the decoupling of the wall is that adding of mass, which we talked about earlier. So for me, I chose to use Havelock insulation, Havelock insulation. It doesn't say how to pronounce it on the website. I will link that down below. They're a great company. So the insulation is made out of sheep's wool. It's super dense. It's moisture resistant, obviously a great thing as well. And it also has an NRC rating of 9, which is again a great rating. That's the noise reduction, the UK one that we talked about previously. You could also use Dial insulation roll. You can find that on B&Q's website. That's also great for moisture resistance because it's made out of recycled plastic bottles. He'd done this by laying kind of wooden struts or battens along the floor, filling those gaps with insulation. There's a diagram up above me, hopefully, if editing me has got it right, that shows you kind of how to lay those struts so that you have that support but you're not allowing sound transfer easily. Obviously this isn't great for sound transfer because the closer the gap, the quicker it's gonna sort of, the easier, if you like, it will transfer. The reason I chose to use pallet wood is because I knew it would be slightly different lengths, slightly different depths, and slightly different widths, so that when that was clad into the roof of my van, you would have almost the effect of diffusion. So sound hitting it would hit those different angles and be diffused more naturally, rather than sort of going back and forth between the carpet and the roof that were both flush and getting sort of flutter echoes and weird frequency boosts that obviously you don't want in your studio. To attach battens across, I did them sort of intermittently. I think they're about 5 off the top of my head, thicker, sort of woollier kind. I didn't want to use that in the roof because, well, it wouldn't have fit. So I used YBS thermal insulation. So now I've decoupled my floor, you've decoupled your ceiling, and you've decoupled your walls. So you've created a second skin effectively. You've helped prevent moisture and condensation, but you've also prevented that sound transfer between interior and exterior. And hopefully nothing, or as little as possible, is touching between those two walls. To reseal them, I would recommend using something like green glue, which is a sound dampening glue, and that will again help with that soundproofing and prevent that exterior and interior transfer. And larger vans have wind mirrors that kind of allow you to see your blind spots, so you could potentially board up your windows and create again a second skin effect, so you can kind of see my layout and see the design for it, but effectively it would be an L-shaped sofa / bed that would pull out into a full double. Bed needed to be high enough obviously to be able to get my guitar, recording equipment and clothes underneath. That's kind of it for the soundproofing. You've added your mass, you've used the absorption, and you've, you know, prevented that sound transfer as to the best of your ability. And the next stage is to acoustically treat that space. Cool, so what is acoustic treatment? Acoustic treatment is effectively the treating, funny that, of standing waves. So standing waves are when you have two sound waves that are sort of cancelling each other out, and they create weird frequencies, weird boosts in the frequencies within a space. In order to acoustically treat those standing waves as effectively as possible, you want your space to be as close to finished as you can get it. Obviously the addition of soft furnishings and things like that, you know, they're all going to aid with sound absorption, so that doesn't matter too much. My mattress is made from memory foam. It's an open cell foam on the top and a closed cell foam on the bottom, which is super great for sound absorption because it leaves you all these little air pockets for sound energy to kind of disperse, and that fabric is super permeable then, so that the sound can go through nice and easy. I wanted to use my mattress as sort of DIY acoustic panels. Obviously, you know, I realised they won't be as effective as an actual acoustic panel because I don't have a membrane, I don't have a sort of fixed wooden panel. For me, this was the closest I could get. I'm still using an open cell material and I've still got a permeable exterior fabric, so it's still going to do some degree of sound absorption. The reason I chose to do this is that personally I really struggle to write and create in a space that's not inspiring me. Having glass picture frames is not great for sound, that obviously it's going to bounce off that and not be absorbed or deflected by it. Obviously tile, again, not great for sound absorption or diffusion, but you know, because this is such a small space and I am living in it and I am doing things other than recording in it, I did have to make a couple of compromises, so that was one of the compromises I made. And then I would hold it up, push indents in around the sides, cut that shape out, and then I just bought a pack of self-screw suction cups off Amazon. So acoustic treatment is effectively the treating of standing waves in your room and those problem frequencies which will stand out in the later stages. Standing waves are more commonly known as room modes. You might have heard that term before if you're a musician or you've ever read any articles on home studios or studios in general. Effectively there are three types. You have axial, which is when the waves are bouncing between two walls. They are bouncing between sort of corners like that, so they're going oblique waves as well, which is between all surfaces in the room. Generally, we're going to try and focus on the axial the most, just because those tend to be the loudest because they lose the least energy. Called AMROC. AMROC allows you to put in your room dimensions, so for my van, obviously that was the 2.5, 1.5 and 1.5, and then it will give you a nice, I was about to say simple, but it's not super simple, but don't worry, I'm going to explain how to understand it. A table full of your room modes that can then be interpreted as to how to begin your acoustic treatment. You can use this equation, which I'm going to pop hopefully up there, if again, editing me is on it, in comparison to the AMROC one, just so you can see sort of the difference between them. Obviously your ear is the best bit of equipment that you have. You're in the room mode, standing waves, they're all going to be affected by this kind of stuff. What you're going to do first is set it up as it would be as a live room or a studio booth. I popped all my window covers on, shut the door obviously. So the way to spot this is if you have any frequencies that reoccur twice. So let's say you have 343 hertz appears 4 times in your table. That frequency is likely to be a problem, so make a note of that. Also note any that are very close together or very far apart. There's loads of sign sweep. You can find these on YouTube. They're super common. There's loads of options out there. Try and find one that plays each frequency for quite a long amount of time. Gauge whether that frequency has gotten louder or quieter. Take notes as you listen to each frequency. Take notes if it's louder, quieter, if it just sort of sounds different in any way. Me, I picked the range of a female vocalist, which is up to about 500 hertz, and a guitar, which is up to about 1,500. But I chose to go all the way just because I tend to play acoustic guitar, which is, you kind of want those harmonics. That's what makes acoustic guitar sound so good. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to play each frequency very slowly. Play that continuously, and then you're going to move around your van, listening out for where it sounds louder, where it sounds quieter, where it's being affected, and kind of find the place where it sounds as normal, as similar to the other frequencies that you've played in your sine sweep, and make a note of where that space was as well, where all my frequencies sounded the same level. Nothing was really booming or sort of quieter massively. Microphones work through sound pressure. They're super sensitive to sound pressure as well. Making little adjustments to that mic stand's position can really help the sound and make a huge difference spatially as well. So bass frequencies were a big issue for me, kind of the 200 hertz range and below, because obviously, well, not obviously, you may not know, but glass and that kind of resonant frequency tends to be a huge issue in that range. So the way I did this is by first moving my mattress panel around. So I found that actually covering those picture frames and covering that mirror and having that absorption behind me was in fact the best way of taming those resonances. Now, if you know anything about bass traps, best place to start for them is to use trihedral corners. So that is where 2 corners on a ceiling or 2 corners on a floor meet. I chose to cover the seam between the windows and the roof, where I found my sound was kind of resonating the most. Part of the reason that my space did sound so good and I wasn't struggling with too much absorption and a dull sound was also due to my design of the roof. Quadratic diffusers, so these come in different shapes and sizes. You have ones with kind of length ways wells, and you have ones with sort of more square shaped wells. They're based on a prime number sequence. I'll pop the calculation up above for you and link a video that explains it in much more detail, but effectively you would use that sequence to calculate the depth of your wells and the kind of intervals, regular intervals. There is a couple on there for sort of 70 quid, 100 quid. I'll put them up on the screen. The best way to describe a Helmholtz resonator is if you've ever blown over the top of a glass bottle and you hear a really specific frequency, and basically you use the volume of that space combined with the length of the port and the circumference of the gap effectively, and you target certain frequencies with that will then be sort of drawn in a super absorbent material, an acoustic panel, whatever you choose to use, right in the back of your space, of your bottle or your volume. The other reason I chose not to use one is that they need a roughly an estimated depth of 30 centimetres. So I can tell you that running a little power cable through your front window at a campsite works perfectly fine. I got mine from B&Q, and I can get all my cables, my laptop, my bass traps as well when I don't want them attached. Then we pan round to the gallery wall, as glorious as she always is. Bed, we've got my plant, a little bit of book storage, and you can see underneath the bed there we've got the apple crate for the clothes, my recording equipment, my guitar, everything I need to turn it into a studio, and my little inside joke rug as well. So yeah, very happy with it. So yeah, so you can see here the window covers, the duvet's been moved to cover that gap between the front seats. So I've got my little Scarlett Focusrite fits on there as well. The light's going so I can see what I'm doing. But I would effectively build a room within a room completely. I would have a wall between the front cabin and the back of the van, the cargo bit, and I would have this space that is completely isolated from the exterior. Theirs is actually split into a live room and a control room. Obviously you don't have to do that if you're living in it. You probably want a bed somewhere between, let's say, floor and exterior floor and interior floor. If you had measured the volume of that and you knew the exact volume of that gap, you could actually even turn that into a Helmholtz resonator. As I've explained, a Helmholtz resonator is just a space which you know the volume of and you've put some holes into not some holes, calculate your whole space. But yeah, you could build a Helmholtz resonator, you know, as part of your second skin. A really common layout in a Sprinter is to have your bed across the back and have kind of bench seats with a table. What I would be doing with the covers for those bench sheets is actually using a traditional acoustic panel method. And again, if you have more space, you could incorporate a quadratic diffuser into wall art. I think the main thing with these van builds is to try and get dual purpose out of as many things as you can. I've got the mattress that doubles as the panels, and thrilled with my final piece. I mean, my van now compared to my van a year ago.